Hey, I'm Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience and achievement of women from all walks of life. In each episode, I pose questions to my guests to peel away the layers to reveal the knowledge and the experience that shapes their narrative. So if you're feeling unseen, unheard, or simply looking for inspiration, then the Power of Women podcast is a great place to join the conversation.
Committed to courageous adventures, adaptive thinking, and the art of crafting a positive human experience. A laser focus on leadership performance and accountability, elevating organisational effectiveness, and shaping emotional architect. Creating fearless individuals to thrive with renewed clarity, energy and confidence. No tolerance for toxic cultures. I'm passionate about being able to make my own choices and exceptional coffee first thing in the morning. What I love about being over 60 is that I can stand on the shoulders of all the amazing women who have gone before me and celebrate in their collective success.
I'm Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. And I too love a coffee first thing in the morning, and I too am over 60. What I have done throughout the course of this year has had the opportunity to interview a number of really accomplished CEOs, female CEOs. And I've spoken with Cassandra Hilbron in Saudi Arabia, Beverly Honig here in my hometown of Melbourne in Australia. And today I am joined by another brilliantly accomplished CEO who has worked across the Asia Pacific region. And for listeners today to have the opportunity to hear about that rise through the ranks of leadership and how to launch our careers is so important. And there's a couple of things I really want to delve into and hear more about today. And they're two things: the value of the individual and the strength of independent thinking. Karen Faehndrich, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thank you, Di. Thank you for having me today.
Karen, I know, like a couple of my guests who have risen through the ranks of executive leadership to the C-suite, you haven't had that traditional route of tertiary qualification and then launching your career. I think, if I'm right, you went straight from school to launching or starting your working life?
I did, absolutely.
So tell us, how did you build your way through the ranks of employee into leadership and ultimately through to the ranks of C-suite and Chief Executive Officer?
Yeah, it's a great question because, Di, I was an anxious student. So whilst I had great sporting abilities, and that's really what gave me my confidence, and that's what gave me access to community and therefore meaningful relationships. Now, I say that because that was important as I stepped into, the world of work and then mustered around, what do I do next? So, I've gone from, the local fitness industry, which is where I began. So I walked away from school and I thought, well, I need to get a job. So I literally started to knock on doors, the local fitness industry, because I had a dance background, and asking for available work. Hey, I'm Karen, I've got a dance background. So I found myself, and this is some years ago, as you can appreciate, right when it was all the rage, as an aerobics instructor. Now, that's not
In
a great
the days of Jane Fonda or before?
Yeah, and, you want to credential yourself. That's probably not what you lead with, but it's the reality. I've never forgotten where I came from. But what I found myself in a situation where there was an opportunity to, in that time, to reflect on what matters to me. So I took myself, I took myself into an academic environment and studied exercise physiology, and I tested that out. But I was really a mature age student. I really returned to serious academic studies at the age of 35 and onwards. I already had, a son by then. So I was navigating, balancing a busy job, motherhood, being a wife, and all the things that come with that.
And did you struggle with academia as a mature age student, or was it different because you were ready to do it and you chose to do it?
I was ready and I chose to. So I was an average. Academically, my results were always average. I panicked when it came to sitting an exam. And to this day, and I've thought about it, I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure where that came from. But I studied, I was a very good student. I studied, I loved school, loved learning, and
But
I
just
still
crap at exams.
I would get, yeah, I would really, really get panicked. I would cry, even if it was a piano exam. It didn't matter what it
Yeah.
was. I would fail and mumble and make mistakes. I would be sitting in an exam and be unable to spell a basic word, and I would panic. And, I had a very supportive upbringing. So it's not as if
Mm.
I was brought up in a family where there was this extraordinary pressure to be an A grade student and lots of criticism. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was nurturing, it was fun, it was engaging, and I was always led to believe that I could be whatever I wanted. And my job was to do my best, just to do
But
my
when
best.
you were being tested, that's where the anxiety kicked in.
Yeah, yeah. And now, for some reason, Di, as a mature age student, I had no anxiety whatsoever, quite the opposite. So I find it quite bizarre. And I'd love to have some profound response as to why that was, but I don't. To this day, I've never really worked out why. I put it down to obviously some really positive life experiences in the workplace, which gave me a level of confidence and perhaps a maturity that the exam doesn't matter so much. And I think it was more the level of importance I placed on this one moment. So what I have learnt as an adult and as my career has rolled along is don't ever place a profound and unwavering amount of importance on one single moment or one single thing, because I think that's what I
Did
did.
that anxiety ever play in once you became a leader of teams and having to stand up in front of people? Was there ever that anxiety then?
No. See, I love to be in front of people. I'm an over
Mm,
preparer. So I prepare. I will be very, very prepared, and that instills a sense of confidence in how I'm moving forward. But
mm.
when I
I struggle with
first
the
was
same bug.
exactly. So when I was, stepping away from my higher education, I wanted to do performing arts. So the whole idea of theatre and plays and performance, I love it. So it's like something. It's a strength that I have that has brought me a sense of gravitas when I'm in front of people. And my very early roles, it actually positioned me well. I was able to engage people and influence people and inspire them.
Brilliant. So let's push aside the anxiety piece because we're going to silo that to the academic exam environment. What were some of the challenges and for listeners today and it's always relatable because the experiences of the executive female, particularly of our era, working their way through the ranks seems to resonate in whichever conversation with whomever I'm having it. But could you share with us some of the challenges you faced as you were building your career to that executive level?
Of course, certainly in the early days, here were the key things. Gaining strategic visibility. It was really difficult, not just being visible, but being seen as being strategic, getting opportunities to engage in activities or being a part of something, being invited to something that gave you an opportunity to showcase that you were a strategic thinker. You understood strategy and you brought that into how you built or grew or crafted an idea and built a business.
So how do you get that seat at the table to be considered and valued as a strategic thinker? What's that journey look like?
It's about stakeholder relationships and it's about sponsorship. Men do this very well. They do it naturally. They can have an argument with a peer in the workplace and a beer with them at the end of the day. That's what they do. They're very comfortable and relaxed about it. They'll
And
never
what do
lose.
women do?
We go home and we worry about it all week and we lose a couple of nights' sleep
Mm.
and we get bags under our eyes. That's what we do. So the
Yeah.
value of establishing a strategy around setting up and seeking out strategic stakeholder relationships. I do a lot of work with executives to this day on this matter. How you
Mm.
invite them to engage with you, how you prepare an agenda, how you prepare your narrative, how you credential what you're asking. They're the individuals that will then sponsor you into the idea of participating in a special secondment, sitting within a special project piece, being invited to sit on that committee. They're the individuals that will do that for you. And I think my experience of women, and certainly those that have reported to me that I've contributed and shaped their success as leaders, is initially there's a lack of understanding of how important that is, and then they're a little anxious about how do I go about that, and I don't want to bother anybody.
So are those supporters always going to be somebody more senior, or what does that support group look like? It's people who are going to elevate and speak on your behalf.
So there's a couple of things to look at when you map out your targets. You want to engage with people that have good political capital in the organisation. So you need to work out who they are. And they're usually more senior people or peers. So there could be some peers that have been there longer than you, that have already done what you're trying to do and are well established and have the ear of some senior people. So you want them on your side, but strong political capital. You also want those that have strong agency over big decisions. You want those that when you see them in forums, meetings, or engage with the business, you can see that people are paying attention to them. They've got a charisma. They're respected. They're yielding some influence. And, sometimes, Di, these aren't people that have leadership qualities that you necessarily admire or aspire to. It's a whole mix of people. Of course, that should be a part of it, but not always. Some people wield great political capital, manage well up, but are not people you necessarily would ever want to report to. So you've just got to work out your landscape.
So can I wind back then to your personal experience? Because I have found sometimes in the workplace you think there are people around you who are advocates, but they actually might not be. Did you ever find that you selected a group of these strategic advocates only to find that they didn't sit well, didn't do the right thing in terms of what we're advocating for you?
It's a very difficult thing to assess. They will usually do and say things, and it will show up elsewhere. So someone who tells you repeatedly, "Don't you worry, I've got your back. I'm looking out for you." I actually find that a red flag now. Where they
Well, I do too, because why do you have to tell me that you are supporting? That should be unspoken.
And the other things that was a red flag is I might be on an operational call where I think I've got a peer in the background that has my back. But the questions my global CEO is asking me is indicative that that's not being shared, or my CEO does not see me on board with an idea that I am, that this wonderful colleague said, "Leave it with me, I'll make sure he knows." So there are red flags. Sometimes you'll never ever work it out. You need to be selective. And it's not so much about, you need to be careful that a stakeholder relationship isn't someone you bare your soul to. So if they choose not to advocate for you, they're not advocating for you. But you don't want to give them ammunition where they can share things they shouldn't be sharing. You never do that. And that's one way to safeguard your position.
So they're definitely not a friend, they're a peer, but they are definitely not going to be in your friendship circle.
You should never confuse the two things. It's not to say you can't foster fabulous relationships. Some of my closest girlfriends are people that I've worked with in the past historically, but it takes, a period of time. Those things can't be rushed, and they evolve and they show themselves for what they truly are over the years. It has to be over the years to get a sense of it. They're the ones that step up when, if things aren't going well or there's been an error or you're under fire. Pause, take a look, and you'll know very, very quickly who your real advocates are, because they'll show up not behind the scenes like a quick phone call. "Don't worry, I've told them that it's not just you." No, they'll show up there and they'll stand beside you. They'll have the tenacity and the fortitude to either own it with you, advocate for you while you're there and present.
So you've raised a point that I think always becomes the red flag when somebody says to me, "Trust me." That's a red flag, because I don't understand why you need to tell me to trust you either. I will choose to trust you or not. I've got your back. Again, that red flag. It's all of those pieces when somebody has to tell you what they're doing, and the reinforcement of that telling actually erodes the belief system that what they're saying is true.
Exactly. Some initial conversation around, like, you can trust me, I'm going to support you in this process. That's meaningful dialogue. But it's this, it's the sidebar conversations. Don't worry, I've got your back. You can trust me. No, let me tell them. So one of the things I always say to my executives is always manage your own narrative, manage your own communication strategy, manage the dialogue yourself. Don't leave it for someone else. If someone says, let me have that conversation for you with them, I would say, let me have that conversation with them for myself. That's always where you want to go if you can.
Do you know, it's a bit like watching a presser when the coach of an AFL team or a sporting team is sitting beside the CEO, and the CEO says, the coach has the full support of the board. And then you count down day 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, gone. It invariably happens.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, isn't it?
It is. It's
Mm,
very simple.
mm.
The landscape is an ever-changing and complex and difficult issue, and it depends on, the nature of where the organisation is at and the types of individuals that sit within it, because we're all motivated and driven by certain things. So if you're a leader that has a strong need to be affiliated, then you'll be someone who tends to say, I've got your back. And then when someone else brings something up, you've got their back as well. Because the drive to affiliate is stronger than the drive to deliver to a reasonable business objective or the integrity of holding the
Isn't that
line and
interesting?
position. So once you get into an environment, you have to do your best to work out what motivates and drives people, and you do that when you select your stakeholders. You need to be careful. Try and work out what motivates and drives this particular stakeholder. And if you sit back and you're intuitive enough, and this is about social intelligence, so you've either got that or you haven't. You can work it out, and once you've worked it out, it allows you to work out how to approach them, whether you should or not, and then how you manage that relationship. So that's the emotional architecture piece that I've spoke to with you earlier about how you intuitively work out the psychology of why that individual is there, what matters to them, and what are the levers or the enablers that you have that will get you to have a real solid sense of trust with them.
So that is, as we started with, that is the value of the individual.
That is the value of the individual. And,
Yeah.
this piece of independent thinking and how you foster that. And if you give an individual an opportunity to really speak to what matters to them, you will hear and understand them better. And I use the term vertical and horizontal listening. And the horizontal is where you sit and it's just like the line. You sit and you hold space with an individual and you let them talk. And you just let them talk and engage and talk. And you listen for what they're saying. You listen for the patterns. Listen for what they're not saying. And every now and then there'll be an opportunity to think, I want to unpack that a little bit. And that's where you do a deep dive. So that's the vertical piece. That's about asking a couple of questions, offering up an idea.
That's my job, Karen.
That is your job, right? So that's right. But a lot of people think vertically all the time. They hear something and they dive in. They hear something and they dive in. And they don't hold space. They don't allow the opportunity for something to, it's a bit like listening to an entire piece of beautiful music. You've got the cello, you've got the drums, you've got the violin, they're all playing a role, and you distinguish one from the other.
So that's the person who, the vertical is the person who keeps cutting in and doesn't actually allow the other person to speak at times too. Well, it can be.
It can be. If vertical has a place, as long as you're being deliberate in why you're then taking it. But if you haven't allowed an individual to express themselves accordingly or with enough space or with enough consideration, then they feel closed off and shut down. And this impacts that sense of who I am as an individual in this environment. So how we feel determines how we behave and what we will and won't bring to the workplace.
You're working now with men and women as an executive coach, yeah? Could I just come back to the female piece just for a moment? Because as you can imagine, being the power of women, it's not the only lens, but it's the primary lens that I like to have these conversations through. From your experience, rather than, and I'm not looking for a textbook answer here, I'm really interested in your personal experience of the challenges of a female navigating their way up the corporate ladder, and would love to hear some of the highs and lows that you experienced in that, Karen.
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned two things, that strategic visibility piece and being heard and securing advocacy. In the early days, I really struggled with that. I have a particularly gregarious style and an extroverted style of thinking, so I think out loud, and I had to learn to moderate that. So I learned some things about myself that just didn't sit well for others at an executive table, and it's not about right or wrong. The bulk of the people at the table were male, so everything was through the masculine lens. So I'm coming in with a female lens and bringing a different style and a different take on what matters that wasn't always received very well. And there was always a sense of being impatient with my perspective because all they wanted were the facts. I've never been one to deliver facts in the absence of impact and the absence of how we got there. It's not been my style. So what I discovered was I was the burden of accommodating the environment fell on me repetitively. It was like my burden to navigate this individual style, my burden to navigate this other individual style. I didn't get a lot of reciprocal support in let us take a moment and allow you then to talk through your issue or to share your idea. And I remember once actually asking one of my CEOs, I remember saying to him, look, we speak once a month. I report out once a month to you. I said, and all I ask of you is every now and then you need to allow me a couple of minutes to express myself in the manner that allows me to think through a complex issue, because you're the only individual I can take this to. I'm not going to speak to my team about it. It's not appropriate. So you need to afford me the opportunity of doing that. It will be worth it. It's not like, I took an hour to explain something.
So is that confidence for advocating for yourself? Is that what we're looking at?
That is exactly, because you can't secure advocacy, you have to advocate for yourself. Now, you've got to be careful how you do that. And I'll be honest, I wasn't even sure initially. So all you can do is test it. You go gently and you test it. I had a tenacity about my style that worked for me at the boardroom table. I had ability to think quick on my feet. I can take something that's probably inappropriate, and I can navigate around it and have a little bit of fun with it. Not too much, but just enough so that, because I didn't need anything to be an issue. I'd made a decision. I didn't need anything to be an issue.
You already knew what you were facing into.
I knew what I was facing, and I was playing the long game, Di. And I talk a lot about play the long game, right? It's not about what's right or wrong. I stopped focusing what is and isn't fair, which is where I started. Well, that doesn't seem fair. Well, no, it doesn't seem fair, and it's not going away. So you need a workaround.
So focus on the long game.
A long game, right? Because if you get stuck with what is and isn't fair, you won't move forward at all. And then you play into.
Well, you're always playing defence if that's
always.
What you're doing. Yeah.
So you're playing not to lose instead of playing to win, right? You show it differently. So there was biases around age and gender. So I moved into managerial roles. I was still very young. So my first regional role, I was 26, and after the whole of Victoria, it was a lot of revenue and a lot of people. I was looking after an Australian-New Zealand piece of business by the age of 28 before I took a year off. And I moved quickly. And I was often given very little direction and support as to what was expected of me, in all honesty. And one of the things I didn't do well initially is with that, I didn't ask. I would go forward silently and muck through it.
And that was out of fear of being found out, or?
A little bit. I think a little bit of imposter syndrome. I'm moving quickly. I'm sure I can do this. People would say, "Oh, I've heard a lot about you, Karen. We've got big hopes for what you're going to do." And I would get in the car and drive home and think, "Good heavens, what does that mean? What am I doing?" Right? Get up the next day and show up. But I learnt to actually start asking questions. Questions to clarify, questions to gather a little more information, instead of just making assumptions and sort of struggling through with a little bit of guesswork. So that put me in it gave me more solid footing for what I was and
So
wasn't
if we
doing.
come back to that comment, there's never any such thing as a stupid question. There may well be a question that reveals that you don't know as much as you should. So is there questions that are over-revealing rather than stupid?
I would agree. I think there are stupid questions, Di.
Okay.
This is where I'm a little, controversial. There are
Okay.
stupid questions. So that's a bit like, the customer's always right. Well, quite frankly, they're not always correct.
They're
How you
not.
manage it is
Yeah.
different. And there are
Yeah.
some pretty stupid questions you can ask. So one does need to be careful around what you ask. It's also not just about what you ask, but it's also about timing. Sometimes the question is a good question and you're in a meeting and there's a level of anxiety within the team and there's some contentious issue playing out, and perhaps that great question, which is a great question, should not be asked now. So what I discovered is all around knowing how to moderate how one engages when in an important meeting, because this is where questions can be stupid. All right, so the question needs to be strategically meaningful to what is being discussed. And if it doesn't have a high level of strategic value, I would suggest you take your question discreetly elsewhere and you tap into a trusted peer. Perhaps Google something. I don't know it depends on what the question is. There are lots of avenues for finding out what you need.
Of course there are. More so than ever before today.
Exactly. And I look at positioning statements. So a positioning statement is something which gives context to why you might be asking something when you're asking it. And if you do it well, it sort of suggests that you sort of understand the question, but you wanted to double check.
I know there's something else you've said too, is you're not in the business of creating artificial harmony within. How's that played out? Because that almost sounds out the gate. That almost sounds combative. What do you mean by that?
Artificial harmony, and a lot of teams have it, is where an individual won't speak up. They won't challenge the status quo because they want harmony. Above and everything else, they want to collaborate. They want everyone to get along. So it's this artificial harmony. Now, the problem with artificial harmony is it usually stems from a lack of trust and psychological safety. And this is why it is bad. It's actually not constructive. It'll be an underperforming team without a doubt. It impacts accountability. It impacts how people bring innovation to the table, and ultimately,
No one's prepared to challenge the status quo.
exactly. Yep. Now, the psychological safety piece is usually because they've had experience where they've brought something up and there's been retribution. They've been made to feel silly. They felt embarrassed. People don't manage the dialogue well. So instead of asking questions, their default position seems to be to critique, right? So to be critical and critique something and to offer up a solution without asking a question, or to deliver directions. So, for example, well, that's, you shouldn't need to ask that, Di, because I sent that out last week in an email and the document attached describes that to you. So now you think, I wish I hadn't have said that. I feel stupid now. I've been called out.
Well, it's a put down.
It is a put down, right? So it stems from a lack of trust. And if you don't have trust, you don't have equal voices. And the research shows, it's called generative listening. Research shows that if you can run and facilitate a meeting where people feel that they've had, not to the minute, but an equal amount of time to express thoughts and feelings, it is one of the strongest characteristics of high-performing teams because it's indicative of people feeling safe. And we are facilitating equal visibility. We're saying to someone, you matter, your point of view is important to me. Di, you haven't spoken for a while. What are your thoughts on this? So it requires whoever's taken lead to know how to do this. So it's complex because, firstly, it requires all these nuanced skills. And this is, talk about the emotional architect. This is where I do a lot of my work. It's around these nuances of how do you ensure that an individual is going to bring a great idea to the room
without fear of being shot down.
Exactly. Or covert retribution that comes later. And we've all been there and we've experienced it. So that becomes the group norm. They expect to be shut down so they won't volunteer.
Yeah.
So that's what I call artificial harmony. People go, that's a great idea, and they walk away and they will say to someone else, that was not a great idea. There's the additional problem with it. They will voice how they feel elsewhere, inappropriately to people who should not be hearing it. And that impacts your overall culture.
Sure does. Well, we're going to take a short break, and coming up, we're going to explore how to become the best version of yourself. And I'm also going to be interested in your thoughts, Karen, around whether we think the pendulum has shifted for how women are approaching the workforce. If you're loving the Power of Women podcast, be sure to jump on to our YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. So, Karen, coming back to the work you're doing as an executive coach, can you expand on what you're doing around organisational architecture of a business to optimise the human experience?
So the architecture piece is around the emotion. So I call it the human experience. I was thinking back to, if I look at my journey trying to build teams and trying to engage in different cultures, I made some mistakes along the way, making assumptions around, I'm in Japan and I know that they're quieter and a little more moderated, but at the end of the day, surely we're all focused on the same things. And then I'd find myself sitting in a meeting in Beijing, and I would push on a point beyond what was appropriate, and I'd be reprimanded.
Poorly received.
Yeah, I stepped away from meetings and experiences feeling stupid. And there are things that keep me awake at night. I've lost sleep going back over and over because that's
So
what we
reading
heard.
the play culturally is absolutely critically, because you've worked across the APAC region, and it's very different in different pockets of that
And just
area.
when you think you've got it worked out, Di, you haven't. And this is what led to this interest in issues of social intelligence, human emotion, and how it is held and managed from one country to the next. Because in the absence of me getting my head around that, I was going to continue to literally put my foot in my mouth, with my, innate enthusiasm, which wasn't always welcomed, right, at the end of the day. So I really had to think hard on that. And what I've discovered just working with executives in the last 3 years, particularly very senior people who you think would get this, they don't. And this is what they struggle with. So it comes back to the ability one has to intuitively look at body language and tone of voice in someone and get a sense of how they're feeling. And then second to that, being sensitive to how you manage that with them, right? And I was using a recent example with a executive team where an individual brought an idea to the agenda. So they raised an agenda item and they tossed this idea out there. And I used the term, this individual literally burst into flames. That was the term I used to describe, because what became very
They
evident,
hung themselves.
this individual hadn't done their homework. They hadn't even socialised this idea with a person who had primary agency over it. So that person in the room, it's the first time they're hearing about this feedback and this idea to fix it. So they're straight away, they're on the defence. And what I noticed was, instead of the team responding in a way that was more supportive and nurturing by asking some questions, who said that? How frequent do you get that
They
feedback?
fanned the flame.
Yeah, they called her out. This is something you should have known. We've looked at this before. I don't think the statistics are relevant. So, they threw petrol on this individual as they continue to, burst and flame away in this meeting. So what happens is, that individual leaves that room, and yeah, they could have done it differently. Well, we're all going to step in and make mistakes. The team could have done it differently, but that individual, in terms of showing up again with another idea, it's unlikely.
Unlikely.
There
Exactly.
you go,
Yeah.
right? It's unlikely.
Yeah.
It's one simple example. It happens all the time. And the other
Mm.
little thing that I noticed, and I hear it a lot, and I probably used that example recently with you when I said, it might be a significant business issue. There's a process to be followed. They'll go to their supervisor and they'll say, look, I just want to check. I'm not sure whether step 1 and 2 is as relevant as step 3. What do I do here? And they'll say, well, let me take you through that now. But by the way, that's something you should know because I talked about it last week in a meeting. So the emotional architecture of what plays out there is that supervisor will think they've done a great job. So I'll say to them, how do you think you handled that? Oh, it was excellent. I made myself ready, available. I took them through it straight away. I said, yeah, and then what did you say after that? Oh, I let them know. And I'll say, so you reminded them. Well, they should have known. Well, that's not what I was doing. I said, so when you say, this is what I hear. When you do,
Mm.
this is what I see. So I take them from the abstract. When you say something, intent is one thing, but the impact is the ultimate architecture of how someone takes it on board and feels, and therefore how they will behave or show up next time.
So what's the relationship between emotional intelligence and emotional architecture? There must be a
So
direct
emotional
correlation.
agility, EQ, so emotional intelligence, and social intelligence. The emotional intelligence is being more aware of the impact you have on others. Being able to demonstrate appropriate empathy, and that's usually when someone has volunteered something. Someone comes to you, this is what happened, tell me more, how you're feeling, what can I do? Social intelligence or sensitivity is more intuitive. It's like someone's not saying something, but you see them in the meeting, and based on their body language or the way they've responded to a question you've asked, you're saying to yourself, that person is uncomfortable. They're feeling concerned. Something is worrying them. And this is the artificial harmony. So I will what's called mine for conflict. So if there's conflict, if there's a concern, do I feel there's something you're not saying? Tell me more about, my sense is you're feeling a little uncomfortable. Is this an opportunity for you to talk about that? So it is always about asking questions. We don't ask questions. We jump in with a solution, with a statistic.
And are males more inclined to do that than females because they want to fix things?
Yes. Yeah, they
Mm.
are fixers. They love to come straight at a solution. So, they listen
Mm.
differently, listen with a different intent. You know, they're, you
Mm.
know, they're look, if you ask a guy for feedback, you better be ready because he'll give it to you.
Mm. Mind you, there are plenty of women these days who will too. So,
There absolutely are. And there's the art, once again, the emotional architecture piece.
mm,
Feedback is a great thing if done well. So, I don't work with executives because they don't recognise they need to be giving feedback or that they're not actually giving it. It's the way they are doing it.
doing
So it's
it.
not
Yeah.
actually giving, and it's not yielding any return for them because they're
Mm.
not doing it well. And when you talk about the issue of social sensitivity, once again, it feeds into that.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's a lack of safety. That's the emotional architecture piece. Is if you make people feel safe and they can trust you, what they will bring to the table is the opportunities for great work, performance, and innovation is unlimited. Just not tapping into it.
So you finding the challenges that, we faced working our way through the corporate ranks, still is as difficult for women today, or is it becoming easier to work their way up the ladder?
I think the challenge is the same, but we've got additional support, or it's getting easier for us to get advocacy.
Mm.
That's what's allowing us to move forward in a safer way.
Yeah, the advocacy piece. I'd agree very much with that.
Yeah,
Mm.
we're not just simply on our own.
Mm.
Where we have people, if I reflect on, what made me feel truly safe when I first engaged at a CEO level and one of my earliest meetings. Quietly inside, I was probably dying 1,000 deaths. I was really aware of myself. I didn't
And there would
feel
have
like
been very few advocates in those days.
and I was the only female CEO for the global structure, and I did not feel safe, and I actually didn't feel like I really should be there, just quietly. I thought, make it, you make it. Just steady yourself. You've got this. And I was exhausted. The amount of energy I deployed in
How
appearing
long
like,
did you operate at that level, Karen? Because that's very stressful, not feeling, and we're not talking physically safe, but we're talking safe as in a corporate sense of safe. How long did you operate at that level?
for most of the time.
Oh wow! So we're talking a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. An easy
Yeah.
decade. Um, it manifested itself differently. So it became more in the moment. So initially it was like lead up to it, I felt that way. In the room, I felt like that. I then worried about it for days and days afterwards. Should have I said that differently? I wonder if that was all
So what
right.
did that look like when you went home? So that's the Karen in the workplace. What does that mean when you close the laptop and turn off the light at night? Is that still where the anxiety is?
Probably, and it's not good for you. So I had to find techniques to relax. Um, you know, I can be extremely intense, and stepping away from that intensity is not always easy. Now, one of the lucky things I had is I'm sporty. I'm a naturally active person. I've
So
retained
that
that.
was your
So
release valve.
it was my release, all that cortisol and adrenaline that I had swirling through my system. I thought if this doesn't kill me, I would hike. I would hike mountains. In the heat, I would hike mountains and I'd spend, endless hours hiking and moving. I always say, move a muscle, change a thought. There's real value in that for me. So, in the absence of that, I would suffer. And the other thing I found I needed is this big extroverted personality would surprise people, loads of cave time.
Of
So,
quiet
I had
time.
to
Yeah, I
shift.
understand that too. Mm.
Yeah, I had to find quiet, dark spaces just to be
Well,
by
it's
myself.
exhausting being on stage and the lead person all the time. You can't sustain that 24/7.
Can't. And you don't change who you are. There's a reason why I live on the side of a mountain, Di. I'm still who I am.
You're still doing the recovery piece. Yeah.
Yeah. This
Mm.
is, friends say, gosh, you get lonely out there, up there? I go, no, not at all. I've got full on days.
Mm.
I'm so grateful for the end of it when I sit on the balcony and go, right, I can't see a neighbour and all I can hear is nature. And I do what's green
Mm.
therapy, I call it. And
Yeah.
there's, that philosophy of taking care of self. I learnt very quickly I needed to pay attention to that. I don't think I would have survived it. And I had advocacy in the room. And I have to say, I think in the absence of that, Di, I might have made it.
Yeah.
I'm guessing
I can understand that.
I knew those
Mm.
that had my back,
Mm.
and they
The
created
money's not
space.
everything.
It is not everything, and they would stop someone who would interrupt me because right to the day I left, I was still being interrupted, Di. I was still being interrupted, and people were still, and it was always males, taking something I just said, showcasing it, and the global CEO would nod and say, I love that idea. And I would walk away going, do I need to say that differently?
So back to my question, is it any easier for women? It probably isn't, other than, to your point, the identification and opportunity to identify more advocates is more readily available to us.
And get support and train. So the idea of this whole idea of executive coaches, women have them now as well. You look back, let
Yes,
me get
yeah.
executive coaches
And I've
for women,
spoken to many women, executive
right?
women, on this podcast who did, and all of them are the successful ones. Yeah,
And they have
yeah.
coaches. The coaches say, let's take a look at this meeting. Let's get you prepared. How are you introducing yourself? What's your intention? How are you positioning that? So business narrative. So I focus on narrative and the architecture of how you feel and what you need
Mm.
to do. So when you show up, I say, throw a suit on and walk into the room like you own it. And they're like, got it. Don't forget that. Walk into that room like you own it.
Well, Karen, I'm going to run out of time to explore all of these valuable points of leadership, and we might have to come back and continue this. But could I ask you, as a closing question, of all of the rich lived experience that that you've amassed over time, if you were to pay forward the most valuable lesson and bit of knowledge that you've learnt, and in particular to a female, what would that be?
Show up. Be absolutely relentless in your pursuit of your own leadership excellence. Never forget where you came from. And stop apologising.
Sounds simple, but it's probably
None
harder
of
to
that is easy.
do. But yeah,
None of that
yeah,
is easy.
yeah, brilliant. Karen, what's the name of your business? How do we find you? Someone wants to engage your services?
I'm very low key. You find me on LinkedIn under my
Or on
name,
the
and that's
side
it.
of a mountain?
Yeah, it's on the side of the mountain on LinkedIn. All my work is referral. And I think it's a testament to the work I do. So if you're interested, you want to have a chat with me, drop me a note via LinkedIn. I'll see it, and you'll get a response.
Fantastic. And we'll put a link to Karen's LinkedIn profile in the show notes of the podcast. So you can go there. Thank you so much for sharing your really valuable leadership insights. It is always a privilege to speak to what is a relatively small cohort of female CEOs. And I have the youngest one was appointed CEO in her 30s into a private family office in Saudi Arabia, which still blows my mind.
But we
And
love
yep. And then
gosh, we
I
love
had the opportunity to speak to another fabulously highly regarded female CEO in Australia only in the last few months, who at 58 has just been promoted to her first group CEO at an ASX level. So there's
loving
plenty
that
out
as well.
there, and it's so brilliant. So if you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast and you think there's some valuable lessons that you'd like to share with somebody within your network from what Karen said today, please be sure to share the podcast and follow and subscribe to it on any of the podcasting platforms. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or on my website, which is powerofwomen.com.au. Until next time.